Bible Poems 1 Kings in 2 parts. Part 1. David is old, a royal bed warmer, no example here, Abishag. Son Adonijah decides the crown is his, thwarted by a mum, Bathsheba, and Nathan, now family priest, who remind the aging king the promise is to Solomon. He reigns with his father David and is told what he must do. Not without bloodshed does Solomon take hold on kingship, but then a golden reign indeed. If it is about wisdom and wealth, this is it. The Queen of Sheba testifies. If it is about God's promises of land and rain and boundaries, this is it. All is fulfilled. If it is about a lovely house for God, the temple, and lofty prayers to dedicate and map out the future, this is it. If it is about God's promised rest, this seems to be it, but must await a greater than Solomon and an easy yoke. Although dazzled, the writer sees the warning signs. We hear too much of slaves and mighty chariots. Solomon's true love for God is smothered by his love of women. Many, many wives, alliances with foreign nations, and worse, with their foreign gods, Ashtoreth, Milcom, Chemosh, Molech, a sorry catalogue. So even as we seem to reach the mountain peak, the weary slide begins. This is not it. God's kingdom is not yet. The tearing must begin. Jeroboam, leader of the workmen, will take the largest piece. Rehoboam, son to Solomon, has his chance, but will not be a servant king. 10 tribes are torn. Judah must not fight. This is an act of God. So now there are 2 lines of kings, not one. Will you start a godly line, Jeroboam at Shechem? No. He makes 2 golden calves for Dan and Bethel. These are your gods. A fearful echo. A race downhill. Judah's Rehoboam exalts the Asherim and all their ugly cult. He is followed by Abijam. Asa listens and applies the brakes. He mainly does the right. In Israel, evil Nadab is toppled by evil Baasha. Jehu speaks God's word. Civil war between the kingdoms. Ben-Hadad of Syria joins the fray. Zimri murders Baasha and rules a mere 7 days before Omri, the soldier's choice, dispatches him. This evil king has an evil son, infamous Ahab. Meanwhile, an age of prophets has begun, a strange brood, yet bringing messages from God. Listen for Yahweh's word. God hasn't left the northern kingdom. enter Elijah. Part 2. Some of the greatest prophets never wrote a book. They just did what God told them. So in Israel, the northern kingdom, Ahab, son of Omri, is the king, worse than all his predecessors, which is saying something. He marries Jezebel, princess of Sidon. The in-gods are more in, gods of fertility, Baal and Asherah, and child sacrifice rears its head. God sends Elijah with a simple word to Ahab. You like those gods who claim to send the rain, but I say, rain there will not be until I say. How will God preserve his prophet at such a time? Besides the brook, the ravens bring him food, and then God sends him to Zarephath. A widow preparing her son's last meal shares what she has, and oil and flour never quite run out. Elijah prays, and her dead or dying son is restored to life. This is the power of God. For 3 whole years, no rain. It's time for Elijah to call on Ahab again. He is out scouring the land for fodder with faithful Obadiah. God has his man in place. Who is Israel's troubler? The praying prophet? No, the faithless king. It's time to have this out. Bring Jezebel's 850 prophets and meet me on Mount Carmel. And so the mighty contest. Make your sacrifice, but let the gods send fire. If sincerity is enough, then these have plenty. The prophets of Baal and Asherah, howling, slashing, beseeching, but still no fire. Elijah, to make the point, sloshes water over his, and more importantly, restores the Lord's old altar. 12 stones speak of God's covenant of love and trust to all the tribes, and in return, his everlasting claim. A simple prayer. May all the people know God and his prophet and return this day to him. With fire, God answered. Sacrifice, wood, water, stones were burnt. The Lord is God. The Queen's prophets pay the price. Elijah prays again, and rain begins to fall. Despair follows victory. The prophet flees exhausted, but God ministers gently with sleep and food. And on the ancient mountaintop of Israel's history, speaks not in wind or quake or fire, but in a gentle whisper. You're not the only faithful one. I have my remnant. Here is Elisha. Ahab has a glimpse of following God in battle before the downward slide begins again. A failure to respect a neighbour's right to land and life draws heavy condemnation, followed by a brief remorse. A final battle. Kings Ahab and Jehoshaphat join sides, but only one will hear the prophet's voice. Sheep scattered on the hillside, desperate for the good shepherd.